India is caught up in the geopolitical posturing by the West. The latest is the U.S. sanctions on Russian oil giants, while India has stood firm so far. If it does cut cheap Russian oil imports, as it did with Iranian crude in 2019, will the country lose out again? The U.S. sanctions on Russia's Rosneft and Lukoil risk a blacklist of Indian refineries if they continue to buy from Moscow after November 21st, when the curbs kick in. The country's refiners will potentially lose out on the Russian oil discount and end up paying a higher price for crude from diversified suppliers. Estimates show India has saved about $17 billion since the start of the Ukraine war from cheaper Russian oil. But for India, the savings and energy security are not the only things to be concerned about. The real question is, what if China continues to import Russian oil at a cheaper rate, shrugging off those sanctions from the US, UK and the EU? India's loss from being cut out of Iranian crude is a good example, while China continues to buy even to this day. New Delhi ended the bulk of its crude oil imports from Iran in mid-2019. The halt came after the US ended exemptions from its sanctions program for countries importing Iranian oil. However, China continued to import from Iran, accounting for over 90% of Tehran's shipped oil exports in recent years, according to tanker Vortexa. Beijing imported 14.6% of its oil from Iran this year, averaging about 1.43 million barrels per day. That despite US periodically imposing sanctions on Chinese companies involved in purchasing and transporting Iranian oil. Iran sells crude to Chinese buyers at significant discounts, often between $5 and $10 per barrel below benchmark Brent crude. On the other hand, India's overall trade with Iran collapsed, contracting by 87% between 2019 and 2024. Before 2019, Iran was India's third largest oil supplier, accounting for about 9% of total imports. But since 2019, India has lost out on favorable terms from Iran. That includes a 60-day credit window for oil purchases, which is not available from other major suppliers like Saudi Arabia, Iraq, or Kuwait. Iran also offered deep discounts on shipping costs and on the crude oil price, similar to China. Now, Russia accounts for 34% of India's total oil imports. Also, India and Russia share ties beyond just oil. So the West's geopolitical wedge could hurt India-Russia ties even more if China continues to ignore sanctions on Moscow. India has not bowed to tariffs used as weapons by the US, but can it do the same about sanctions? Mr. Jayant Krishna is a senior fellow, Center for Strategic and International Studies. He is now joining us live from New Delhi. Welcome to the broadcast, Mr. Krishna, and thank you very much for making time for us. What do the U.S. sanctions on Russian oil giants mean to Indian refiners?
See, one thing we need to understand is that, what kind of sanctions are these? They've clearly jolted the energy markets worldwide. US has actually blacklisted two biggest crude oil producers in Russia, which is Rosneft and Lukoil, right? So, and all eyes are now on how will the entire world react to it, and how will it, what impact it will have on the supply and prices of oil in general and crude oil in particular. So I think, let's understand, what they essentially mean is, the US sanctions mean is that all US entities, I mean, largely the ban is for sanctions are for US entities. They are banned from business dealings with these two companies, Now, for non-US companies, while it is directly not mandatory, these sanctions, but the fact is that they may also, the non-US entities may also be penalized if they do business with these two companies, right? So, oil buyers, would have no choice or very little choice but to shun, these two companies, because let's understand that the large chunk of global e-commerce, actually depends on the banking system, the trading system, insurance system, and most of them are operated through the US and European Union, So that is actually, the entire, stuff. And let's understand understand, almost, a very substantive part of Russia produces almost 7.3 million barrels of oil every day. And this accounts for 7% of global consumption, right? And 85% of the crude oil is just imported by two countries, China and India put together, which is about 3.6 million barrels per day, And almost, I mean, oil is so crucial to the Russian economy. And, almost one-fourth of the Russian federal budget directly comes from oil. So I think now coming back to your question that, how will it impact India? I don't think India has much of a choice, but, we have to cut down, if not halt immediately in a staggered manner, because just 1 month is left before the deadline ends. And eventually, I think India will have no choice but to cut down Russian crude oil imports. And, let's also understand that it comes at a very heavy price. Because what the price at which India gets Russian crude oil right now is at least 20% cheaper than the prevalent market price, right? So, and in this kind of a scenario with these two sanctions, major sanctions, crude price oil is likely to go up everywhere, while Middle East suppliers will be happy, but they have also shown indications that the prices will go up, So I think India will have to pay a huge price on that. That's the whole problem. But it has no choice but to cut down. And the public sector companies have already announced. Reliance has also indicated that they will cut down. So I think I don't think it has much of a choice but to gradually reduce, imports from Russia.
Mr. Krishna, this problem started with US President Donald Trump. He's been piling pressure on India, and he's also been singling out India for buying Russian oil. What is your take on this pressure by US President Donald Trump?
Yes, you are right. I think largely it is a pressure tactics, because ideally India should be allowed to do business dealings with any country wherever it sees it makes economic sense, right? But, China buys much more, Russian crude oil than what India buys from Russia, right? But why is it that the tariff against China is just about 30%, and against India it's total tariff including the penalties 50%, right? So the reason is China has been able to acquire some kind of a economic indispensability, right? Their clout. If you really look at, President Trump has lots of scores to settle with China, because with China, US has a negative trade surplus of $300 billion, right? So, but the fact is, because of China's clout and the fact that they control 70% of the world's mined rare earths and 90% of the processed rare earths, US is not able to while they keep threatening, but the fact is they have not been able to go beyond 30% of tariff on that at all. So I think it's a huge setback for India. But that's the world we are living in, where, the world today doesn't believe in negotiations, doesn't believe in, across the table discussions. And largely, these things happen, these wars are fought on social media platforms and through threats. So India has to succumb to that. It has no alternative, but that's the way it is,
Mr. Krishna, it's good to see you. We'll have to end it there. Thank you very much for talking to us today.
Pleasure.